And we are live.
Awesome. All right. Should I just get started then?
Well, yes, you may. I'm hoping, can everybody see us, right? We're trying something new here. So, all right, I'll start you off. Good afternoon, everyone. I am, yeah. Well, yes. I'm hoping, can everybody see us, right? We're trying something here. So, all right, I'll start you off. Good afternoon. I am, okay, so I'm not sure what's going on now.
I think there's a lag of sound. Oh, no, it's not lagging. All right. It looks like it stopped here. Maybe it's when you speak for some reason, since you have the different screens up or accounts up. Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah. All right. Yay. I'll just talk. Let's hope it works. If anything crazy happens, then we'll learn from that. So, okay. So welcome to the Right Corner webinar series. This is the first part of a 3-part series on ways to get you started and then sustain and improve your academic writing. And I hope everyone brought something to drink. I was hoping for some warm cocoa or something, but it's too hot. I just have water, but it's all good. So with that said, trying to go to the next slide. All right. With that said, my name is Margarita Huerta, and I'm an associate professor, just barely minted associate professor in the College of Education here at UNLV. And I wanted to thank Dr. Harriet Barlow and the fantastic staff at UNLV's The Intersection for making this possible, especially with all this technology. Thank you. And I think the more information we can get out to help each other with writing, the better. So I'm very, very grateful for the Intersection being able to disseminate this important information. And I hope it's helpful. I also want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Patricia Goodson at Texas A&M University, who's really the one who set me on this life-transforming path of being productive and actually enjoying academic writing. And just with the blessing to share this with other people who are willing to listen. And so in this webinar, the plan is to present about 30 minutes of content. I did a run through last night. It took me about 35, but if I stay on script, it should be 30. So that we'll have time then to field questions and then hopefully have time to do some actual writing. So what you can do is I'm just going to kind of run through all the information. And why don't you just jot down if you have any questions. You can put them in the chat box too, but we won't field them until the end if that's okay with everyone, just because there's a lot to cover. So with that, let's start talking about how to stop stressing and start writing and how we can reduce writing anxiety. I went ahead and made a slide. I don't know. For me, sometimes when I write, I like when people give me citations. If for whatever reason you wanted or needed to cite this presentation, I did a template for you there. I also wanted to say I did use images and I included the URLs from where they're from. And a lot of those links actually have interesting things to read about writing. So I just want to throw that out there. So let's get started with an icebreaker. So I wanted you to pause and think. When you think about a big or even small writing project, do you ever feel like this cat who's supposed to be, I think, anxious? And if you want to participate, if you want to put a yes on the chat box or a no, that's fine. But I know Juanita says always, yeah. I know I certainly have felt this way many times, still do. Yep, Mercedes, when I have a writing project to do. Yep. And so I don't know if the cat has a writing project, but so the bad news, it's like, do you want the good news or bad news first? So we'll start with bad news. The bad news is writing anxiety is real. So in a publication that I was able to co-author with Dr. Patricia Goodson and colleagues, we just defined writing anxiety as the manifestation of feelings of tension, worries, thoughts, physical changes like increased blood pressure when a person's confronted with a writing task. And it is a real thing. There's actually quite a bit of documented work on writing anxiety amongst academic writers, and it's often related to writer's block. We're going to cover that amongst university teachers even, and just having a negative effect on graduate students and even their grades. So that's the bad news. Some of you are just joining, you're getting to the good news. Oops, I can't move with my keyboard for some reason. The good news is that you're not alone. Because we saw in the chat box, a lot of us were saying, yes, we do get anxious sometimes with writing. And writing anxiety can actually be reduced. And one way to do that is to increase our writing self-efficacy. So what do I mean by writing self-efficacy? So here's a little definition. Writing self-efficacy can be defined as belief in one's capability or confidence to write in a given situation. And the even better news is that writing self-efficacy has been found to be negatively, and that's a good thing, correlated to writing anxiety. So if you have higher writing self-efficacy, you'll have less writing anxiety. So if we can find ways to increase our writing self-efficacy, we can reduce writing anxiety and ultimately, hopefully, our writing productivity. The citation, if anyone's interested, is right there for that study. That does quantitative correlations with these variables. So, all right. So let's move on. So I wanted to share how we can do this, right? So in this session, I'm going to paint kind of broad but very important and foundational strokes regarding this topic. And then in the next section, I'll go into some finer details and more specific tools, okay? But these points are so important that I really don't want to skip over them. And I will give you some practical things as well, but they're a little more conceptual. So bear with me. I think, though, they're very important for a strong foundation. And the first one is to embrace your writing and identity. And I think this is not something that's talked enough about in research with academic writing. But it's important because as humans, we inherently want to understand, the meaning, the so what of what we do, right? I don't know how many of you review writing pieces, whether it's student writing or maybe manuscripts that you review for publication or books. But I know that when we read something in academia, at least I want it to have an underlying point, right? A reason. And when I was in high school, we called this very important point the thesis statement. And if writing doesn't have a point, I get frustrated or bored, right? I want to know the so what of what I'm reading. And I think in the same way as academics, this is kind of meta thinking, we need a reason for why we're writing. And so for a few people, the so what is simply the enjoyment of writing. And that's just a few people. And my illustration here is that I actually grew up I love to write. I have a background in English literature. I used to write creatively. And then when I got to grad school, I hated writing and I had to reflect and think, why do I suddenly not like writing? And I think the problem was writing just was not enjoyable anymore or meaningful. And I was just kind of fulfilling assignments, just writing because I had to, right? But thankfully, academic writing didn't stay this way for me. And it doesn't have to be that way for you. If it is, I mean, if it's not, that's great. So what happened? So first, I moved into an academic field that I was passionate about. I was in a field that I was not. And so this is very important. Wherever you are, I highly encourage you to make sure that you're in a field or doing a project or studying something that you care deeply about, because it's really for the long haul, right? It's not an easy thing to do. So make sure it's something you're passionate about. And second, I learned from Dr. Pat Goodson, I consider my writing mentor, that my academic writing had an important purpose. And I know that sounds very simple, but it's not. It was very deep for me. The idea that my writing was to get research out into the world. And she explained that I could produce the most interesting, elaborate, well thought out study, but if I didn't publish it, it just didn't exist out in the world for other people to read. So that really hit home for me, and I thought, oh, okay. But then I really have to say, okay, I'm a writer. I'm a researcher, but I'm also a writer. So if you believe your research matters, why not share it with others? And how do we do that in academia? The primary way is publishing. There are certainly other ways, but all those ways really involve communication, I would argue, right? Which always comes down to writing, publishing in some form or other. If you're, I don't know if anyone here is in fine arts or music. I know there's different venues, but it's still a process of composition of some form or other and putting it out there in the world. So I don't want to undermine external motivating factors, such as wanting to graduate, for example, or seeking tenure and promotion. These can be big motivators and so what's to academic writing. For example, I will admit, before I got my first tenure track position, it was a little hard to be motivated to write and publish because there's no really external reward, right, for that. But I do think that those external motivators shouldn't be our only motivators for meaningful academic research, because they can cause a lot of anxiety for people. And when we do reach milestones, external rewards should be handled in a healthy manner. We should celebrate those milestones, like finishing a thesis and graduating, getting tenure, whatever, promotion, turning in that paper and getting an A, So I just wanted to talk about that. So the first point is, first and foremost, understand you're a writer and that what you publish is important. Okay. Here, normally I would pause and say questions, but we'll save those to the end. So let's move on to the second point, or second section, which is establishing a writing routine. So I want to discuss the critical importance of this, and this is very, very, very important. I have pictures of books that talk about academic writing, and I think they would all agree that this is part of being a productive academic writer. So before I learned that books actually existed on academic writing, I actually did not know until I took a writing session like this one workshop. I didn't know the power of the simple but important idea of having a writing routine. So I'm going to talk more in the next section about tools to help with this. But some of the points I really want to drive home today is to schedule your writing time and protect it. So for that, really, you just need your calendar. And also to establish regularity like a habit. So let me talk a little bit about these books. The first one, The How to Write a Lot, that's written by Paul Silva. I believe there's a book study going on at UNLV on this book right now. It's a great first book to get your writing started. It's inexpensive, it's short, sweet, to the point. I think Paul Silva's thesis is simply just do it. I mean, just sit down and do it and stick to your writing plan. He's very much a person that says write every day if you can. Pat Goodson is similar in the sense of she believes in it's just easier to establish a habit if you do it daily in small chunks. Her book has very helpful tips and exercises about how to write different parts of an academic paper. And I'm going to take a lot of ideas actually from this book as we go through this writing series, just because it's so very much about specific things that can help with academic writing. Cal Newport's book is more about focus. He's a professor of computer science, but he writes a lot of books, which is interesting, like that are not about computer science. But he wrote this book where he defines deep work as, and I'm quoting him, professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. So when I read that, I thought, well, this is really what we should strive our academic writing to be like, right? In our research, we want our work to create new value, to improve our skills, and to be hard to replicate only in the sense of that it took effort to create what you did, that you're adding value and something new. Of course, we want people to be able to replicate our studies. That's not what I'm saying. So, and to do this, we really need to be in a distraction-free environment. So Newport documents the writing habits of great thinkers throughout history and writers to illustrate how they engage in deep work through focus. And so the question is, how do we focus? And if you read the book, there's a lot of ideas. Some of them are a bit radical, and I think he's, rightfully so, very critical of how we live in a very distracted world, right? We have cell phones and chats and things that pop up on our screens, but that's, you can read that on your own time. But I kind of simplified this into two main types of focus. To me, there's external focus. So it's all those ideas I was saying, like if I really need to concentrate, I turn, and anything else for just the set amount of time so I can focus, right? And then there's internal focus, which is more about what are you writing about? Like, what's your main point? I don't know about you, and we're going to talk a little more about this in another session. I can easily get distracted when I'm researching a topic and digress and be like, ooh, I want to read that, or ooh, I want to know more about that. So what does it mean to focus to get your task done? And I'll give you more tools and tips on that later. But the main idea is schedule your writing time, find regularity, and focus, okay? One of the most frequent questions I get when I do writing workshops, when I mention writing routine, is how often should we schedule our writing? And I already mentioned a little bit about that. Silva and Goodson will say daily. Newport, I think when he talks about his habit, it sounds like a daily thing. But some experts, and they're all experts, but some writers like Helen Sword will say it depends. Helen Sword wrote Air and Light and Time and Space. I believe she's in Australia. She does research on academic writers, and she did a big qualitative study where she surveyed and interviewed productive academic writers all over the world. And she just sat down with them, I'm not sure if she physically sat down with them, but she interviewed them and surveyed them to learn about their writing habits. And among her key findings were that each writer had their own kind of routine. So they all had a routine. They didn't all necessarily write every day. A lot of them did, but some didn't, but they all had a routine, okay? And they all expressed that writing, even though these were people, I forget, she has her criteria in the back of the book, who are considered very productive writers and good writers in academia. Good. They all said that writing was hard, that it was messy, and it was frustrating, but the writing process and the end product was ultimately enjoyable for them. So that kind of goes back to that first point of your writing identity, right? And being sure that you're doing something that's meaningful and that for you, because writing is, even if like these very, very productive people who are considered experts in their field and have been writing for many, many decades, they still say it's not easy. So it's hopefully not just too discouraging. It's more, I hope the point is encouraging to you if you find writing difficult, messy, hard, frustrating sometimes. So do they. But if you find that enjoyment in that final creation of what you've done or accomplished, then it's worth it to keep going, right? So the bottom line is, as Goodson and Silva tell us, daily habits are easier to maintain and they're ideal. Kind of like, I don't know, if you brush your teeth every day, you don't really think about it. It's just such a habit, right? So if you can get to that point with writing, like every day I'm just going to sit down and do this, right? But daily habits might not be realistic for everyone, like Helen Sword notes. Some people just set aside chunks of the year to write. So like, for example, I write in the summer, or I'm not saying I do, but some people might say, well, the year is just too crazy, so I set my summer aside to write, or things like that. So one of the second most frequent questions I get is, how long should I be writing? And ideally, I would say not too long.